The sun had just begun to rise over the vast expanse of the battlefield, casting a warm, golden glow over the landscape. The temperature was a crisp 58 degrees Fahrenheit, with a gentle breeze blowing in from the east at a speed of approximately 5 miles per hour. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming wildflowers, which grew in abundance throughout the rolling hills and verdant valleys of the countryside. However, this serene atmosphere was juxtaposed with the stark reality of war, as the smell of gunpowder and smoke hung heavy over the battlefield, a constant reminder of the devastating conflict that had been raging for weeks. As the morning light began to creep over the horizon, the soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division stirred to life, emerging from their foxholes and trenches to begin another long day of fighting. They were armed with an array of weapons, including the M1 Garand rifle, the M1 carbine, and the M1911 pistol. The M1 Garand, with its distinctive M-block clip system, was the primary rifle used by the infantrymen, while the M1 carbine, with its lightweight design and 15-round magazine, was often carried by officers and non-commissioned officers. The M1911 pistol, with its reliable .45 ACP cartridge, was a trusted sidearm that had been used by the U.S. military for decades. The soldiers themselves were a mixture of seasoned veterans and fresh-faced recruits, all of whom had been thrown into the maelstrom of war with little more than a few weeks of training. They were dressed in the standard-issue M1941 field jacket, which was made of a durable cotton and polyester blend, and featured a distinctive waist-length design with 2 large pockets on the chest. The jacket was often worn over a white or light-colored t-shirt, which helped to reflect the sun's rays and keep the soldiers cool in the warm summer weather. On their heads, the soldiers wore the M1 helmet, which was made of a lightweight steel alloy and featured a distinctive dish-shaped design that provided excellent protection against shrapnel and other airborne threats. As the morning wore on, the soldiers began to stir and prepare for another long day of fighting. They ate a hearty breakfast, consisting of canned rations such as Spam and beans, which were often served with a side of stale bread and a packet of instant coffee. The coffee was a welcome pick-me-up, and helped to shake off the lingering fatigue of a long night spent huddled in foxholes and trenches. As they ate, the soldiers talked and joked with one another, trying to boost each other's morale and alleviate the crushing sense of tension that hung over the battlefield like a pall. Meanwhile, in the distance, the sound of artillery fire could be heard, as the big guns of the U.S. Army's Artillery Corps began to open up on the enemy positions. The guns themselves were a mixture of 105mm and 155mm howitzers, which were capable of firing a variety of different shells, including high-explosive fragmenta, foundation rounds, smoke rounds, and even precision-guided munitions. The howitzers were mounted on sturdy wheeled carriages, which allowed them to be easily towed into position and set up for firing. As they fired, the guns produced a deafening roar, which shook the very ground beneath the soldiers' feet and sent shockwaves through the air. The artillery fire was designed to soften up the enemy positions and make it easier for the infantry to advance and take control of key terrain features such as hills, ridges, and crossroads. The enemy, a combined force of German and Italian troops, was well entrenched and well armed, and would not give up their positions without a fierce and bloody fight. As the artillery fire raged on, the soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division prepared to move out, knowing that they would soon be facing the full fury of the enemy's defenses. As they checked their gear and made final preparations for the assault, the soldiers' minds were focused on the task at hand. They knew that the coming battle would be fierce and intense, and that they would have to rely on their training and their wits in order to survive. The soldiers' faces were set with determination, their jaws clenched in anticipation of the fight to come. They knew that they would have to push through their fear and their fatigue, and find a way to overcome the enemy's defenses if they were to emerge victorious. The exact model of the guns used by the Artillery Corps was the M2A1 105mm howitz, which was a reliable and versatile piece of equipment that had been used by the U.S. Army since the early 1940s. The M2A1 was capable of firing a variety of different shells, including high-explosive fragmentation rounds and smoke rounds, and had a maximum range of approximately 500 yards. The gun itself was mounted on a sturdy wheeled carriage, which allowed it to be easily towed into position and set up for firing. As the artillery fire continued to rage on, the soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division began to move out, advancing slowly and cautiously across the battlefield. They were met with a hail of gunfire and artillery shells, which exploded all around them and sent shrapnel flying in all directions. The soldiers hit the ground, seeking cover behind any available terrain feature, such as rocks, trees, or folds in the ground. As they caught their breath and assessed the situation, they knew that they would have to find a way to overcome the enemy's defenses if they were to emerge victorious. The sound of gunfire and explosions filled the air, a constant reminder of the danger and uncertainty that lay ahead. The soldiers' hearts were racing with fear and adrenaline as they struggled to make sense of the chaotic and rapidly changing situation. The smell of smoke and cordite hung heavy over the battlefield, a pungent and acrid odor that seemed to cling to everything it touched. As the soldiers moved forward, they knew that they would have to navigate this treacherous landscape, using all of their skills and training to stay alive and achieve their objectives. The terrain itself was a complex mixture of hills, valleys, and ridges, with numerous streams and rivers cutting through the landscape. The ground was dry and hard, with a thick layer of dust and dirt that rose up into the air with every step. The vegetation was sparse and scrubby, with small trees and bushes clinging to the hillsides and valleys. As the soldiers moved forward, they would have to use this terrain to their advantage, seeking out cover and concealment behind rocks, trees, and other natural features. As the battle raged on, the soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division found themselves facing a formidable enemy, one that was well-trained, well-armed, and determined to fight to the last man. The enemy troops were a mixture of German and Italian soldiers, all of whom were equipped with the latest in military technology and tactics. They were armed with a variety of different weapons, including the Carabiner 98K rifle, the MP40 submachine gun, and the MG42 machine gun. The Carabiner 98K was a reliable and accurate rifle, with a maximum range of approximately 1,000 yards. The MP40 was a versatile and deadly submachine gun, capable of firing 500 rounds per minute. The MG42 was a powerful and feared machine gun, with a maximum range of approximately 200 yards. As the soldiers of the 101st Airborne Division advanced across the battlefield, they knew that they would have to use all of their skills and training to overcome the enemy's defenses. They would have to navigate the complex terrain, using cover and concealment to stay alive and achieve their objectives. They would have to use their knowledge of military tactics and strategy to outmaneuver the enemy and find a way to break through their lines. As they moved forward, they knew that they would be facing a fierce and determined enemy, one that would stop at nothing to achieve victory. The outcome of the battle was far from certain, and the soldiers knew that they would have to give it their all if they were to emerge victorious. As the battle commenced, the Allied forces, comprising of infantry, cavalry, and artillery, began to execute their meticulous plan. The infantry, divided into 3 brigades, formed the core of the assault. The 1st Brigade, positioned on the right flank, consisted of seasoned veterans, armed with muskets and bayonets, who were tasked with breaching the enemy's defenses. They advanced in a staggered formation, with each company forming a line, while the next company formed a column, allowing for a continuous and relentless push forward. The 2nd Brigade, situated in the center, comprised of a mix of experienced soldiers and new recruits, who were armed with a combination of muskets, rifles, and cannons. They formed a dense column, with the cannons at the forefront, which provided covering fire as they advanced. The 3rd Brigade, positioned on the left flank, was composed of light infantry, equipped with rifles and skirmishing tactics, who were responsible for outflanking and harassing the enemy's vulnerable points. As the infantry advanced, the cavalry, divided into 2 regiments, began to maneuver on the periphery of the battlefield. The 1st Regiment, consisting of heavy cavalry, formed a line on the right flank, parallel to the infantry's advance, while the 2nd Regiment, comprising of light cavalry, performed a wide sweep on the left flank, aiming to outflank and disrupt the enemy's lines. The artillery, positioned behind the infantry, provided supporting fire, with cannons and howitzers unleashing a barrage of shells and cannonballs upon the enemy's fortified positions. The enemy, anticipating the Allied forces' assault, had entrenched themselves behind a series of fortified earthworks, redoubts, and abattis. Their infantry, divided into 2 lines, formed a dense formation, with the first line consisting of seasoned troops, armed with muskets and bayonets, while the 2nd line, comprising of less experienced soldiers, provided supporting fire from a distance. The enemy's cavalry, positioned on the flanks, formed a series of small, mobile units, tasked with countering the Allied cavalry's maneuvers. As the Allied infantry advanced, they encountered the enemy's first line of defense, which consisted of a series of shallow trenches and abatis. The 1st Brigade, on the right flank, led the charge, with their Musk-TS at the ready. They formed a line, 2 companies deep, with the front company firing a volley, while the 2nd company reloaded and prepared to fire. The enemy's first line, however, held firm, and the Allied infantry suffered heavy casualties as they attempted to breach the trenches. The 2nd Brigade, in the center, fared slightly better, as their cannons provided covering fire, blasting gaps in the enemy's earthworks. The infantry, following closely behind the cannons, poured through the breaches, engaging the enemy in fierce hand-to-hand combat. The 3rd Brigade, on the left flank, employed skirmishing tactics, firing from behind trees and rocks, and gradually outflanking the enemy's position. Meanwhile, the cavalry regiments continued to maneuver on the flanks, with the heavy cavalry on the right flank charging the enemy's cavalry, while the light cavalry on the left flank performed a wide sweep, aiming to cut off the enemy's lines of retreat. The artillery, adjusting their aim, began to target the enemy's command centers, pounding their headquarters and communication hubs with precise and devastating fire. As the battle raged on, the Allied forces' tactical plan began to unfold, with each unit performing its designated role. The infantry, although suffering heavy casualties, continued to push forward, gradually weakening the enemy's defenses. The cavalry, having outflanked the enemy's position, began to threaten their rear, forcing them to divert troops to counter the menace. The artillery, having silenced the enemy's cannons, turned their attention to the enemy's infantry, blasting gaps in their lines and creating chaos. The enemy, realizing their position was becoming increasingly untenable, began to fall back, regrouping and reorganizing their forces. However, the Allied forces, sensing victory within their grasp, pressed their advantage, pursuing the enemy with relentless ferocity. The battlefield, once a scene of meticulous planning and execution, had descended into chaos, with units clashing in a frenzy of steel, smoke, and blood. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the carnage, the Allied forces had gained a decisive advantage. The enemy's lines, once formidable and unyielding, had been breached, and their troops were in full retreat. The Allied infantry, exhausted but triumphant, pursued the enemy, cutting down any who dared to stand in their way. The cavalry, having outflanked and disrupted the enemy's lines, had become the decisive factor, chasing down the enemy's fleeing troops and denying them any hope of regrouping. The artillery, having played a crucial role in the battle, ceased their firing, their cannons fallen silent as the enemy's positions were overrun. The battlefield, once a scene of intense and brutal conflict, had fallen silent, the only sound, the moans of the wounded and the dying. The Allied forces, victorious but at great cost, had emerged from the battle, their tactics and strategy having proven superior to those of their enemy. As the dust settled, the true extent of the carnage became apparent, with thousands of soldiers lying dead or wounded, their bodies strewn across the battlefield like discarded toys. The battle, a testament to the brutality and chaos of war, had been won, but at what cost? Only time would tell. As the Allied forces pushed deeper into the heart of enemy territory, the cacophony of war grew louder, a chaotic symphony of clashing steel, screams of the fallen, and the relentless thunder of artillery fire. The M4 Sherman tanks, with their 75mm M3 L40 guns, rumbled forward, their treads screeching in protest as they navigated the treacherous terrain. The tank's armor, a mere 51mm of cast steel, seemed woefully inadequate against the German Panther's 75mm KWK-42 L70 gun, which could penetrate up to 149mm of armor at a range of 1,000 meters. Meanwhile, the Allied infantry, armed with the trusty M1 Garand rifle, its 8-round en-bloc clip a testament to American ingenuity, moved cautiously through the dense underbrush, ever vigilant for the telltale sign of a German sniper's nest. The rifle's .3006 Springfield cartridge, with its 150-grain bullet, was more than capable of dropping an enemy soldier at ranges of up to 500 yards, but the infantrymen knew that in the heat of battle, accuracy was often a luxury they couldn't afford. As the Allies advanced, the Germans unleashed a withering barrage of artillery fire, their 88mm Flak 36 gun, basis, with their impressive muzzle velocity of 820 meters per second, sending shells screaming through the air to detonate with devastating effect amidst the Allied ranks. The ensuing chaos was a blur of smoke, fire, and screaming men, as the Allies struggled to maintain their momentum in the face of such ferocious opposition. Logistically, the Allied supply chain was a marvel of modern warfare, with thousands of tons of equipment, ammunition, and fuel being transported daily across the English Channel, a testament to the ingenuity of the Allied quartermasters. The Allies' reliance on the LCVP, landing craft, vehicle, personnel, and the LST, landing ship, tank, had proven invaluable in the Normandy landings, allowing them to establish a solid foothold on European soil. However, the Germans, masters of blitzkrieg warfare, had not been idle, and their own logistical network, though strained, continued to function with surprising efficiency. The German army's use of the Kettenkrad, a half-tracked motorcycle, allowed them to rapidly transport troops and equipment across the battlefield, while their extensive network of underground bunkers and tunnels provided a secure haven from which to launch devastating counterattacks. As the battle raged on, the Allied air support, comprised of squadrons of P-47 Thunderbolts and P-51 Mustangs, roared through the skies, their .50 caliber machine guns and 5-inch rockets unleashing hell upon the German positions. The Mustang's impressive range, courtesy of its 180-gallon fuel tank, allowed it to escort the bombers deep into enemy territory, while the Thunderbolt's ruggedness and firepower made it the perfect ground attack aircraft. On the ground, the Allies' own engineering corps worked tirelessly to clear minefields, repair damaged infrastructure, and construct new roads, a testament to their skill and dedication. The use of the M4A3R3 Sherman, with its ingenious T-15E2 flamethrower, had proven particularly effective in clearing out German strongpoints, the flame's intense heat capable of igniting even the most stubborn of fortifications. Yet despite these advancements, the battle was far from won, and the Allies soon found themselves facing a new and formidable foe, the German Tiger II tank, its 88mm KWK-43L71 gun, a behemoth of firepower, capable of penetrating up to 185mm of armor at a range of 1,000 meters. The Tiger's armor, a staggering 150mm of cast steel, made it all but invulnerable to the Allied tank guns, and its sheer size, 10.6 meters in length, made it a daunting opponent on the battlefield. As the sun began to set on the blood-soaked landscape, the Allies steeled themselves for the fight ahead, knowing that the coming night would bring only more chaos, more bloodshed, and more sacrifices. The war was far from over, and the outcome still hung precariously in the balance, as the two mighty armies clashed in a frenzy of steel, fire, and death, each side determined to emerge victorious from the abyss. War. The Allies' determination and cunning would be pitted against the Germans' skill and ferocity, in a battle that would decide the fate of Europe and the course of history. The night ahead would be filled with the sounds of gunfire, screams of the wounded, and the constant rumble of artillery fire, a never-ending reminder of the horrors of war. The soldiers on both sides would have to dig deep within themselves to find the strength to carry on, to push through the exhaustion, the fear, and the uncertainty, and to emerge victorious in the end. The battle was far from over, and the war would rage on, leaving destruction, chaos, and despair in its wake. The outcome was still uncertain, and the world held its breath, waiting to see which side would emerge victorious, and which would be vanquished. The fate of Europe, and the future of humanity, hung in the balance, as the two armies clashed in a struggle that would decide the course of history. In the midst of this chaos, the soldiers on both sides would have to confront their own mortality, and the reality of war. They would have to come to terms with the fact that they might not survive, that they might be killed or wounded, and that their families and loved ones might never see them again. The psychological toll of war would be immense, and the soldiers would have to find ways to cope with the stress, the fear, and the uncertainty. They would have to rely on their training, their comrades, and their own inner strength, to carry them through the darkest of times. As the battle raged on, the world watched in horror, mesmerized by the sheer scale of the destruction and the unimaginable suffering of the soldiers and civilians caught in the crossfire. The war was a reminder of the darkest aspects of human nature and the devastating consequences of conflict and aggression. It was a testament to the enduring power of violence and the enduring fragility of human life. And yet, even in the midst of such chaos and destruction, there were moments of courage, of sacrifice, and of compassion that reminded us of the best of human nature and the enduring power of the human spirit. The battle would continue, raging on like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. The soldiers would fight on, driven by their duty, their honor, and their loyalty to their comrades and their country. They would push forward, into the unknown, into the darkness, and into the heart of the enemy's stronghold. They would face unimaginable dangers and overcome unimaginable challenges. And in the end, they would emerge victorious, or defeated, but always forever changed by the experience of war. The war would leave its mark on the world, a scar that would never fully heal, a reminder of the devastating consequences of conflict and the enduring power of the human spirit. As the cacophony of war reached a fever pitch, the battlefield transformed into a maelstrom of chaos, where the very fabric of reality seemed to unravel. The air was heavy with the acrid smell of smoke, sweat, and blood, a noxious cocktail that clung to every surface like a malignant entity. The ground trembled beneath the feet of the combatants, as if the earth itself was being torn asunder by the unrelenting fury of the clash. The soldiers on both sides were reduced to mere automatons, their faces twisted into grotesque masks of fear, adrenaline, and determination. Their eyes, once bright and full of life, had dulled to a flat, vacant stare, a testament to the dehumanizing effects of the relentless slaughter. The sounds of war, the staccato bursts of gunfire, the deafening roar of artillery, and the anguished screams of the wounded, had become a constant, maddening drone that threatened to consume them all. In the midst of this bedlam, a young lieutenant, no more than 25 years old, found himself at the epicenter of the maelstrom. His name was lost to the annals of time, but his actions would become etched in the memories of those who survived the carnage. With a ferocity born of desperation, he rallied his troops, a ragtag band of survivors who had managed to withstand the initial onslaught. Together they launched a series of daring counterattacks, each one a testament to their unyielding resolve to emerge victorious from the abyss. As they charged forward, the lieutenant's senses were assaulted by a kaleidoscope of sights, sounds, and smells. The earthy smell of freshly dug trenches, the metallic tango of blood, and the acrid stench of smoke combined to create a potent cocktail that threatened to overwhelm him. The cacophony of war, the screams of the wounded, the staccato bursts of gunfire, and the thunderous roar of artillery created a maddening backdrop that pushed him to the very limits of human endurance. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the lieutenant pressed on, driven by a fierce determination to survive, to overcome, and to emerge victorious. His heart pounded in his chest like a blacksmith's hammer, shaping and molding him into a formidable instrument of war. Every step forward was a testament to his unyielding resolve, every breath a defiance of the chaos that threatened to consume him. As the battle raged on, the lieutenant's world narrowed to a tiny, frenzied universe, where the only constants were the clash of steel on steel, the scent of smoke and blood, and the anguished cries of the fallen. Time itself became distorted, stretching and compressing in impossible ways, as if the very fabric of reality was being warped and twisted by the sheer intensity of the conflict. In this fevered landscape, the lieutenant's thoughts were a jumbled mix of fear, adrenaline, and calculation. He knew that the next few moments would be crucial, that the fate of the battle, and perhaps even the war, hung precariously in the balance. Every decision, every movement, and every breath was a gamble, a high-stakes bet on the outcome of a conflict that seemed to have no end in sight. And yet, even as the chaos reached its zenith, the lieutenant remained focused, his mind crystal clear in the midst of the madness. He knew that the key to victory lay not in the grand strategy or the clever tactics, but in the simple, brutal act of killing. To emerge victorious, one had to be willing to face the abyss, to stare into the void, and to confront the darkest aspects of human nature. In this sense, the lieutenant was not just a soldier, but a symbol of humanity's primal urge to survive, to overcome, and to emerge victorious, no matter the cost. As he charged forward, his rifle firing in short, controlled bursts, he embodied the very essence of war, a brutal, visceral, and devastating spectacle that reduced all participants to their most basic, primal level. The battlefield, once a sterile, abstract concept, had become a living, breathing entity, a malevolent force that seemed to exert a malign influence over all who dared to enter its domain. It was a realm where the rules of civilization were twisted and distorted, where the norms of human behavior were turned upside down, and where the only constant was the ever-present specter of death. In this twisted landscape, the lieutenant and his comrades fought on, their movements a testament to their unyielding resolve to survive, to overcome, and to emerge victorious. They were no longer soldiers, but rather killing machines, driven by a primal urge to destroy, to devastate, and to annihilate. Emmy, once a distant, abstract concept, had become a tangible, hate-filled entity, a monstrous other that had to be eradicated at all costs. As the battle reached its climax, the lieutenant's world had become a tiny, frenzied universe, where the only constants were the clash of steel on steel, the scent of smoke and blood, and the anguished cries of the fallen. Time itself had become distorted, stretching and compressing in impossible ways, as if the very fabric of reality was being warped and twisted by the sheer intensity of the conflict. In this fevered landscape, the lieutenant's thoughts were a jumbled mix of fear, adrenaline, and calculation. He knew that the next few moments would be crucial, that the fate of the battle, and perhaps even the war, hung precariously in the balance. Every decision, every movement, and every breath was a gamble, a high-stakes bet on the outcome of a conflict that seemed to have no end in sight. And yet, even as the chaos reached its zenith, the lieutenant remained focused, his mind crystal clear in the midst of the madness. He knew that the key to victory lay not in the grand strategy or the clever tactics, but in the simple, brutal act of killing. To emerge victorious, one had to be willing to face the abyss, to stare into the void, and to confront the darkest aspects of human nature. In this sense, the lieutenant was not just a soldier, but a symbol of humanity's primal urge to survive, to overcome, and to emerge victorious, no matter the cost. As he charged forward, his rifle firing in short, controlled bursts, he embodied the very essence of war, a brutal, visceral, and devastating spectacle that reduced all participants to their most basic, primal level. The outcome of the battle was far from certain, as the two armies clashed in a frenzy of steel and fire. The lieutenant's fate, like that of countless others, hung precariously in the balance, as the chaos of war threatened to consume them all. And yet, even in the midst of this madness, there was a strange, perverse beauty to the spectacle, a testament to the enduring power of human nature to persevere, to overcome, and to emerge victorious, no matter the cost. As the dust settled, the eerie silence that followed the catastrophic event was only punctuated by the anguished cries of the wounded and the dying. The landscape, once a thriving and bustling hub of military activity, was now a desolate expanse of destruction, littered with the shattered remains of equipment, vehicles, and the bodies of the fallen. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke, ash, and the sickly sweet stench of blood, a noxious miasma that clung to every surface like a bad omen. The immediate aftermath was a scene of unmitigated chaos, as those who had managed to survive the initial blast stumbled through the wreckage, desperately searching for any sign of their comrades. The sounds of moaning, screaming, and pleading for help filled the air, a haunting chorus that seemed to come from all directions at once. Medics and medical personnel, their faces set in grim determination, rushed to tend to the wounded, their movements swift and practiced as they worked to stabilize the most critical cases. Casualty reports began to filter in, each one a stark reminder of the devastating toll the disaster had taken. The numbers were staggering, with hundreds confirmed dead or missing, and many more injured, some critically. The sheer scale of the disaster was only beginning to sink in, as the reality of the situation slowly dawned on those who had been fortunate enough to escape the worst of the blast. Individual stories of survival began to emerge, each one a testament to the resilience and determination of the human spirit. There was the story of Private Johnson, who had been buried under a pile of rubble, but managed to dig his way out, despite suffering severe injuries to his legs and back. There was the story of Sergeant Thompson, who had been blown off his feet, but somehow managed to crawl to safety, where he promptly passed out from his injuries. And there was the story of Lieutenant Lee, who had been trapped in a burning vehicle, but managed to escape, despite suffering severe burns to his face and arms. As the hours ticked by, the full extent of the disaster became clearer. The blast had destroyed a significant portion of the military base, including several key buildings, such as the headquarters, the barracks, and the medical facility. The damage was so extensive that it would take weeks, if not months, to fully assess and repair. The human cost, however, was far more devastating. Families would be torn apart, lives would be forever changed, and the psychological trauma would linger for years to come. The survivors, many of whom were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives, struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Some were left numb, unable to process the sheer scale of the disaster, while others were consumed by grief, anger, and frustration. The sense of loss was overwhelming, as friends, comrades, and loved ones were mourned, their memories forever etched in the minds of those who had survived. As the news of the disaster spread, the outside world began to take notice. Governments, international organizations, and humanitarian agencies sprang into action, offering aid, support, and condolences to those affected. The media, too, descended upon the scene, eager to capture the story of the disaster and the stories of those who had lived through it. The world watched in horror as the images of devastation and destruction were beamed into living rooms, a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the devastating consequences of conflict. In the midst of this chaos, a sense of community began to emerge. Survivors, despite their differences, came together, united in their grief and their determination to rebuild. Neighbors who had previously been strangers became close friends as they worked together to clear the rubble and to comfort one another. The disaster, as devastating as it was, had brought people together in a way that nothing else could. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, the healing process slowly began. The physical scars would take time to heal, but the emotional wounds would take far longer. The survivors, however, were determined to rebuild, to recover, and to emerge stronger, more resilient, and more united than ever before. The fall of the military base was a tragedy, but it was also a catalyst for change, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope, always a way forward, and always a chance to rebuild and to start anew. The story of the disaster would be etched in the annals of history, a reminder of the devastating consequences of conflict and the indomitable human spirit which can overcome even the most daunting challenges. As the dust settled on the battlefields of the past, the world was left to grapple with the long-term geopolitical implications of the conflicts that had shaped the course of history. The intricate web of alliances, rivalries, and power struggles that had defined the era of war had given rise to a new world order, one in which the relationships between nations were forever altered. The aftermath of war had brought about a profound sense of disillusionment, as the promises of a better future that had been made to the masses were found to be nothing more than empty rhetoric. In the years that followed, the world was forced to confront the harsh realities of the new geopolitical landscape. The old empires, which had once been the dominant powers, were now in decline, their influence waning as new nations rose to take their place. The United States, having emerged from the war as one of the dominant world powers, found itself at the forefront of a new era of international relations. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, had established itself as a formidable force, its communist ideology spreading like wildfire across the globe. As the decades passed, the world became increasingly polarized, with the two superpowers engaging in a bitter struggle for dominance. The Cold War, as it came to be known, was a period of intense ideological rivalry, marked by proxy wars, espionage, and a relentless arms race. The world was plunged into a state of perpetual unease, as the threat of nuclear war hung precariously in the balance. The consequences of such a war were too terrible to contemplate, and yet, the possibility of it happening seemed to grow more likely with each passing day. Despite the tensions, there were moments of hope, glimpses of a brighter future that seemed to beckon on the horizon. The formation of the United Nations, for example, was seen as a major step forward, a recognition that the world needed a collective framework for addressing the common challenges that faced humanity. The European Union, too, was a beacon of hope, a testament to the power of cooperation and integration. As the years went by, the EU expanded its membership, embracing new nations and fostering a sense of unity and purpose among its member states. However, the legacy of war was not so easily erased. The scars of conflict ran deep, and the memories of the past continued to shape the present. In the Middle East, for example, the aftershocks of war were still being felt, as nations struggled to come to terms with the arbitrary borders that had been imposed upon them. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, a seemingly intractable problem, continued to simmer, a potent reminder of the unfinished business of the past. The rise of terrorism, too, was a direct consequence of the geopolitical upheaval that had been unleashed by war. As the world struggled to make sense of the complex and often bewildering landscape of international relations, it became increasingly clear that the legacy of war would be a lasting one. The wars of the past had created a world in which the rule of law was often seen as a distant second to the rule of power. Might, rather than right, had become the guiding principle of international relations, and the consequences of this were starkly evident. The vulnerable and the weak were often left to suffer, their voices drowned out by the cacophony of competing interests and rivalries. And yet, despite the many challenges that the world faced, there was a sense that humanity was capable of more, that the legacy of war, while profound, was not the only narrative that defined the human experience. There were other stories too, stories of courage and resilience, of compassion and kindness. These stories, often overlooked in the grand narrative of history, were a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. As we reflect on the legacy of war, we are forced to confront the darker aspects of our own nature. We are reminded that the capacity for violence and destruction is a fundamental part of the human condition, and that the horrors of war are a stark reminder of what we are capable of inflicting upon each other. And yet, even in the face of such darkness, there is a glimmer of hope, a hope that one day we might learn to transcend our differences, to find common ground, and to work towards a world in which the legacy of war is a distant memory. As the great philosopher Immanuel Kant once said, "Out of the crooked timber of humanity, no straight thing can ever be made." And yet, it is in the very crookedness of our nature that we find the possibility of redemption. For it is in our flaws, our weaknesses, and our vulnerabilities that we are reminded of our shared humanity. As we navigate the complex and often treacherous landscape of international relations, we would do well to remember this. We would do well to approach each other with compassion, with empathy, and with a deep understanding of the complexities that shape our world. If you've enjoyed this journey through the history of war and its legacy, please subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analysis and exploration of the complexities of the human experience. Together, we can work towards a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us, and perhaps, just perhaps, we might find a way to create a brighter, more peaceful future for all.